you guys ever seen a writer that knew how to use a mic stand? I haven't. Just a little joke to open up with. I'm really nervous because I always get really nervous before readings. So I'm going to read from my thesis novel that I just finished at UBC. It doesn't have like a solid title yet. The working title is $0.00067, but I think that it's not very catchy. So, like, I like what it does in relation to like the work, but I don't know if I'm going to keep that. So, anyway, it's about. I'm going to read from the middle of the book, so I'll give context. But the first chapter is about a young man and a young woman go on a Tinder date together. Well, it's not technically Tinder; it's a social media. It's a mobile dating application. That's fictional. Wow. And they don't have a great time. They don't really connect. But they end up sleeping together, and then deciding they're going to see each other again. And then the book kind of follows both of their parallel storylines over the course of like the next year, as they separately have their own kind of stuff going on. It's mostly just a lot of partying, a lot of dates, a lot of drinking, and young people being nihilistic. I'm going to read a scene from the middle of the book from the young man's perspective. The narrator refers to him as the male, and he, at this point, is at a party. He has a crush on this girl, the musician, and she's just performed music at this party, and now he's trying to track her down and talk to her. That's basically the whole context. I'll just read it. You know. I went back and forth on like 3 different things I wanted to read, and I couldn't decide, so I'm just going to read this one and see how it goes. After her performance, the musician appeared to be scrambling to quickly disassemble her equipment. So the male merely smiled and waved to her, and filed out of the living room behind a small crowd of others before descending the spiral stairs to the sidewalk, where he found the publicist smoking a cigarette and speaking with the male to whom he was attracted, plus one other male. The publicist is his good friend who he came to the party with. The male asked the publicist for a cigarette, and instead received one from the publicist's crush, at which point he was introduced to the 2 other males. He began to recognize his presence at the party as entirely contingent on the musicians. Locating her and spending time with her were his only current strong desires, he saw, which seemed to him somehow false or pathetic, and he attempted to become more invested in the publicist's presence and the present conversation about a contemporary documentary film, but, not having seen the film himself, and not finding its subject matter intriguing, the male mainly paid attention to the body language of the publicist and his crush as they debated an aspect of the film's ending. Their argument had all the histrionics and rhetorical verve of blooming mutual attraction, and the male felt certain that the 2 would spend the night together. Soon it became difficult for the male to simultaneously pay attention to their words and gestures, while periodically glancing over his shoulder to check the spiral staircase and balcony for signs of the musician or anyone who might know her whereabouts. And the 3rd male had just asked him what he did for a living, he realized from within a brief silence. After pausing midway through his sentence and restructuring it 3 times, the male stated that currently he did, quote, nothing, unquote, for a living, but that he'd just moved back to the city, and he half-heartedly asked whether this male had any suggestions. This is supposed to take place in Montreal. So much context. Just then, an older man appeared, who, the male thought, slightly resembled one of his favorite authors, and as he passed them, he yelled at full volume, causing the male to jump, an English sentence fragment about, quote, parents shot in front of their children, unquote, and about how this, quote, didn't matter, unquote, and continued walking past, tension visible in arms and fists that gripped the stretched plastic handles of 2 overloaded shopping bags. The 4 young men, silent, made eye contact with one another. The man soon yelled again, but the male couldn't decipher these words, sensing them incorrectly to be of a mumbled French. And when he was finally out of earshot, the publicist diagnosed the man with a chronic mental disorder. The man's volume and the seeming violence in his cry had caused the male's heart rate to accelerate, and as the publicist and his crush laughed and attempted to establish a context for the screamed words, the male began, irrationally, he knew, to feel slightly unsafe, to notice the impenetrable shadow of the nearby alleyway, and to imagine himself in inept combat with a truly violent man in the dark, next imagining several decades beyond his current moment that he had become the man with the shopping bags, seeing himself screaming atrocities and slandering his ex-girlfriend at the young man of the future. He said that it had been nice to meet the new males, dropped the cigarette's butt on the sidewalk and ascended the stairs. On the balcony, he nearly collided with the musician as she stepped out the front door with a female friend in tow. Recoiling from the near impact, he loudly said her name, spread his arms and hugged her torso for 4 seconds. When their embrace unfurled, he saw that the musician seemed to be avoiding looking toward his eyes. So a couple nights before this, they slept together, and he'd like that to happen again. He saw that the musician seemed to be avoiding looking toward his eyes. She quickly introduced him to her friend, and asked how his, quote, night was, quote, doing, unquote. He claimed, she's French, he claimed to be having fun, and to be slightly intoxicated. But the energy from her on the night on the grass and in his bedroom had been replaced by a flatness or lack of affect, and there was still little eye contact as he praised her performance, noting one song he particularly liked. She thanked him, smiled, and immediately turned to descend the staircase followed by her friend. In an instant she was halfway to the ground. Had she interpreted his praise as mere courtesy, as social convention? As he saw the back of her head disappear, the male momentarily thought to follow her, but his intuition seemed to advise against it. Then, amazed, he found himself once again stepping inside the apartment's front door, since now that she'd moved on, he knew it was necessary that he resume his pretended course, that is, to re-enter the party. And in doing so, he discovered the hallway now filled with a loud neo-garage rock song he found viscerally tasteless and grating. Who had seized control of the stereo? He clenched his teeth and sidestepped a thin young man who wore a style of mustache that the male guest had come into popularity in the 1890s, automatically rating him and everything he assumed he represented. And this guy has problems. He's in a really bad mood, Mr. Actor. In the kitchen, the male accidentally encountered another young man he met through his ex-girlfriend, and he spent nearly 3 minutes updating this male regarding his recent move and listening to his complaints about his job washing dishes late at night in a local Italian restaurant before he abruptly claimed he had to get back to searching for someone he'd just now been searching for. To sell this exit and to pass time, the male began hurriedly slipping around various people in the hall with his phone lit up in his right hand, now and then asking to be excused, and pretending to peek into each of the party's rooms as he passed them, briefly feigning a puzzled facial expression in each doorway, and squinting at the real faces of various sincerely puzzled-seeming young people, scanning for the non-existent face of a fictional person, and even once, momentarily, on the threshold of the crowded fire escape, nearly succeeding to convince himself that there was in fact someone he was searching for, until he began to semi-consciously view the party as a labyrinthine painting of hell, and retreated toward the front door as quickly as he could dodge the partygoers in his way. He could see the musician below as he descended, talking with 2 people on the sidewalk and smoking what looked like marijuana. She had been in a rush, he decided, when he'd run into her the previous time. She'd had some pressing social or artistic career-type business to attend to, and he'd caught her in the middle of it. But now, standing laughing with her friends, she was in a much more approachable position. He would simply walk up to her and in an extremely casual tone, he'd ask what she planned to do after the party. 7 steps from the pavement, however, the male accidentally overstepped the edge of one of the triangular stairs and his right heel slipped down and he lost his footing, skipping/sliding down 2 stairs and clinging to both handrails to save himself from descending the coiled stairwell as one would a water slide. The event severely startled yet did not injure him, but its echoing clang summoned the gaze of everyone convened outside, and when the musician glanced at him in the midst of his recovery, she looked away even quicker than she had on the balcony. At street level, trembling from the shock of his gaffe, or from loathing of the performance he'd staged upon the apartment's thresholds, or from anger at the romantic fantasy he'd already so thoroughly erected around the musician, or from all three, the male glared at the sidewalk approximately 3 meters ahead of his feet as he walked, and, unable to spot the publicist nearby, he continued walking quickly in the direction of his apartment. Midway through the next city block, he approached a discarded wine bottle on the sidewalk, and when he reached it, he stomped down with his heel and as much force as he could summon, sending a crackling bang and a burst of glass out into the street. He arrived home to his new apartment at 2:21 a.m. and went straight into the washroom to clean his teeth. In his bedroom, he lay supine on his bed, typing unanswered text messages to his closest friend regarding the musician. Then he set his phone down and closed his eyes. Slowly, as if initially overcoming some inertia, his nervous system began signaling that his bedroom was rotating on a horizontal axis. Nauseated, he opened his eyes and perceived the room pitching itself slightly clockwise to return to its standard orientation. He hobbled to the kitchen and poured a glass of water from the tap, stood drinking the entire glass before the cloud of air bubbles had time to disperse, and stood manipulating his phone. Gotta rewrite that sentence, really bad. He found the female's profile, and this is like first draft stuff, a lot of it, and I don't know, whatever. I'm being like ridiculously self-conscious right now. He found the female's profile on the image sharing service, looked at 5 of her photos, clicked to quote unfollow her, unquote, then filled his glass with more water to bring to his bedside. That's supposed to be about the other character in the book, the other protagonist, not the musician. He pulled his computer from his desktop, sat in bed, and opened it on his lap. He scrolled the newsfeed of his social networking account for 8 minutes, liking 3 posts and posting 2 faux-naive comments, then navigated the privacy settings menu, and, with only momentary hesitation, unblocked his ex-girlfriend. He immediately looked at the most recent photo she posted of herself, which he'd not seen before. It had been uploaded only 2 weeks prior, and it depicted his ex-girlfriend in an alleyway between buildings, leaning with one outstretched arm against the wall, her hip exaggeratedly popped out to the non-wall side, her head cocked at a diagonal, purposely affecting a silly and ostensibly unattractive facial expression, calculatedly failing, as usual, to appear unattractive. It had been liked by 68 people and had drawn 11 comments. Turning his attention away from her body, he became aware that the photo's scene's architecture looked distinctly foreign and aged. Instead of asphalt, the alley's pavement was a warping grid of small square cobblestones. The wall she touched was coated in a pale yellow stucco. The opposite wall, brown stucco, with several large patches where the material had flaked and crumbled away. Oh my god, guys, I really messed this up. So, there's supposed to be some more context, which is that he's dealing with this breakup throughout the whole book. And that's kind of the crux of his narrative, is him trying to get over this situation that's happened, where someone left him saying that they wanted to be single, and then 10 days later they were dating a new person, which was her best friend. And now he's discovering that she and this new person have gone on a trip to Europe together, which he had hoped, like a trip that they had kind of planned together, is now happened between his ex-girlfriend and her new boyfriend. And that's what he's discovering. If you heard this part, that would be obvious, but it's not obvious. The familiar accelerations in the male's heart and respiration rates and the shivering had already begun. He scrolled down his ex-girlfriend's profile and soon found a public message from her close female friend, who the male knew currently lived in Portugal, which had been posted 10 days prior, stating that this friend missed his ex-girlfriend, quote, already, unquote. His ex-girlfriend's new boyfriend had commented below the message, joking about feeling left out, below which the friend had joked about how happy she was that he was now back home and that she was finally rid of him. Shivering and experiencing periodic convulsions in his chest, with his eyebrows arched and his nose 10 inches from his computer screen, the male continued inspecting his ex-girlfriend's profile, soon finding a post from 6 weeks prior in which she denounced that she was seeking someone to sublet her bedroom for the last 2 weeks of the next month, while she would be on vacation. He clicked on this post and, by way of a comment, appended an animated virtual, quote, sticker, unquote, of a slightly anthropomorphized green owl. This owl sported reading glasses and sat smiling with an open book propped up in its lap, and the male laughed and deleted the sticker, then immediately posted it again. Once again viewing himself as at least mildly psychotic, the male looked through the album of publicly available photos of his ex-girlfriend, finding several which had been posted over the past 3 months, 7 of which figured both her and her new boyfriend, typically laughing candidly or displaying ridiculous faces and poses, usually surrounded by the rest of the close mutual friend circle to which the couple had belonged even before dating, before the male had ever encountered her. Below 3 photos of the couple, the male posted 3 additional stickers, which depicted the green owl, 1 with cartoon hearts floating and bursting above its head and replacing its irises, 2 shaking its tail feathers in a comical dance, and 3 peering through a pair of binoculars, its eyes magnified by the big lenses, amazed by what it sees. He then closed his computer, placed it on the floor beside his bed, and lay laughing until he cried. Shivering, attempting to control his breathing, he saw his ex-girlfriend at various famous ancient/romantic locations with her new boyfriend. He saw the couple attempting to have extremely quiet intercourse so as not to wake the other guests in their communal hostel room. He tensed his right hand into a fist beside his thigh and rapidly struck the fist against his forehead/temple 4 times with as much force as he could deliver against himself. The final blow landed above his closed eye and yielded a vision of bursting sparks on his retina, which he saw as an orange firework exploding silently and immediately leaving its purpling after silhouette. He could not discern whether he felt psychotic with jealousy or with self-disgust at his continued irrational jealousy, or both. He saw various simultaneous scenes of his ex-girlfriend's varying reactions when she woke in the morning, or perhaps checked her phone soon amid a current late-night date or party, and received notification of the stickers. It was even possible she'd already seen them, he felt. He could not conceive of any way she might read them that would not lead her to conclude that her ex-boyfriend was seriously mentally/emotionally disturbed, and perhaps always had been, reassuring her, as if she needed reassurance, that she had done herself a monumental favor by discontinuing their relationship. He struck his head twice more with increased force, which caused an aching pain to bloom and caused the trembling to intensify. He wasn't going to succeed in seriously injuring himself by this method, he knew, but he knew also that he didn't currently have the determination or need to find a more suitable weapon/substance/height, and he internally characterized himself as someone who couldn't even properly inflict self-harm. Though he was in his bed and his room was dark and quiet, he would not be able to sleep, he felt, unless he deleted the stickers and reblocked his ex-girlfriend. The anticipation of her reaction, plus the myriad reactions of all their mutual friends, had released a significant amount of adrenaline into his system, and his mind now seemed to whir at a speed he experienced as equal to the imagined electrical frequency of a civic power line, constantly humming through small bits of imagined negative social information and certain to keep him awake all night. Yet he felt oddly determined not to delete his absurd commentary. He saw himself as perhaps having self-published the most sincere utterance he'd ever produced, amid what he currently viewed as an endless stream of pretense and curated data and ulterior motives and self-promotion. He was slightly psychotic, he felt he knew, whether or not he had any right to be, and he wanted the world to truly see him. He held his head in his hands, periodically opening his eyes to urge the ceiling back out of its orbit, imagining himself lying awake, trembling and vomiting until dawn. After 17 minutes, however, he was asleep. He would not be able to remember the night's dreams. Okay, so so that one didn't really make sense to read as an excerpt, but I think I picked that because I wanted to talk about like mental health a little bit in the like other thing I'm interested in, section 3. First, I guess I'll talk about my writing process a little bit. I've always felt like kind of alienated by the word's writing process, because for me, I feel like writing is so sporadic and so unpredictable, and I'll have months where I write every day and I'm working on something all the time and it feels really good, and then I'll have like years of not writing anything. Hence, like, the last novel came out 6 years ago. This one I'm now just finishing. And in between, I was trying to write a whole bunch of other things that just kind of like sputtered out and I didn't publish. I think what happens for me is I usually will get a voice in my head. In the first book, it was the voice of a 10-year-old boy. who's adopted and who's obsessed with the idea of what his real parents, his real father specifically, is doing at this moment. And I had this idea of this kid and the way that he spoke, and that kind of like drove the whole novel forward for me. With this book, it started with the first chapter, which is about the date, and immediately it was like an omniscient narrator, which I'd never written before, and I don't know, I just felt really drawn to the idea of breaking that kind of rule, because I feel like it's kind of an unwritten rule, at least in like literary fiction, that omniscient narrators are kind of like off limits, because for good reason, like, I mean, postmodernism happened, and like we all kind of agree that no one has an objective view on reality, and like you can't, it's impossible to believe an omniscient narrator. But I wanted to try to like construct an omniscient narrator as an exercise and see where it went, and it just became so fun that I kept writing it, and that really drove the book forward for me. So I guess voice is always a big thing, and it's hard because it's not something you can just like start. Like it's always just happened to me, and then I've continued it. I do have more deliberate like ways of writing where I do think that writing exercises and like you're talking about like constraints that you put on your process. I think those are really productive things that I use sometimes also, but mostly it doesn't work that way. And yeah, I guess what I was going to say, I alternate between periods of inspiration and total apathy. And when I'm in the mode of inspiration, I like to try to get everything down as quickly as I can, because then I can move on to my favorite part of the writing process, which is editing. I find editing to be the most powerful part of the process, because writing the first draft, sometimes I almost feel like I wish someone could write it for me, and then I could just take it and cross it out and cross it out and rework it until it's mine. I don't know why that is. I feel like when I have the thing in front of me and I'm doing the correcting, I feel like there's a lot of power in that. Like it takes away the like kind of fear of saying the wrong thing, because the wrong thing is already on the page, and then you can just edit into the right thing. Or at least that's how it works for me. That's how I think about it. Then yeah, I want to talk a little bit about like the idea of mindfulness and mental health and social media and stuff. I guess we're all talking about social media tonight. It makes sense. It's like the world we live in now. I think I have a more pessimistic view of it. Maybe it comes up in the novel also, as you'll see. But maybe like I'll do questions on the writing process, or questions on anything so far. And if there are no questions, I'll just go on to the next one.
Well, I have a quick one. When you are talking about editing and liking that better, you say you try to write like the whole thing and then edit the whole thing, or do you ever like take a break just to go back and edit?
Yeah, no, I definitely. If I said that, I was lying. I don't get through the whole draft first before editing. I may get through like a chapter. When I was writing this thing, I would do a chapter at a time, because I was submitting it for workshops at UBC, so it kind of worked out that every 3 weeks or so I'd have to submit 20 pages, and that would be kind of like a chapter. Then I'd go back and rewrite. Yeah, so I don't always get through the whole thing, and I do edit as I go. Like this is a first draft of mine. It's like, it's got stuff crossed out all over it. It's like, I don't even know which ones I'm going to read, or like how any of the sentences are going to work. But yeah, I'm more of like a compulsive editor, I think. I do edit all the way through it. Yeah.
Do you ever get stuck in that editing process, like never finalize?
Yeah.
Some things.
Yeah, definitely. There's a story that I just submitted recently that I think I started in 2012, and I'm now just sending it out now, which I worked on it with an editor at the Puritan for a while, and we were working on it, and then it just, I don't know, we kind of fizzled out, and then I came back to it years later and edited it again, and I'm sending it out again. There's a story I had come out in 2016, which I had started in 2009, which had a totally different format than where it ended up. And so yeah, I know like the writer George Saunders talks about like his book 10th of December, there's one story he was working on for over 12 years or something. And I really like that idea because I just like the relationship you develop with a piece of art when you're spending that much time with it. I think you begin to like see it on a level that's, I don't know, you become omniscient kind of to this thing. But yeah, I do get stuck editing things forever, and then it's time to get someone else to look at it, I think. So with this book, I'm working with an editor now, waiting on her comments, waiting very impatiently, wanting to get her comments on it so that I can go back and keep working on it again. Yeah.
So voice is a big factor for you when you're conceiving the story idea. Do you specifically go out and seek voices? Like, do you notice interesting voices in the media and go, oh, I can use that?
Yeah, that's a good question. Sort of, yeah, I do. There are people, I notice people in my life who have a way of speaking that gets into my head. I think that happens to everyone, and I start to want to talk like that person and be able to express like that person, or like that form. Like I wrote a story that was called "How to Form an Idea of a Person," and it takes kind of the voice of like an online like how-to guide, like a WikiHow kind of thing, but it's about like how to turn a person into an idea in your head.
That's very similar to what you're doing in this novel. For me, when you were reading that was very like documentary and like go really extreme. David Attenborough is reading this novel too.
Yeah. So I think voices come up naturally out of the environment. Definitely, it's not always just something I've made up. And then the more problematic one is like sometimes you read an author and you just can't help but write like them. So like I read Kafka and I was like, I need 3 years to recover from this. Like I'm only writing like Kafka now. So that kind of happens too. And I don't know, I've always thought of myself as kind of like a mockingbird in a way, where I don't know if I have an original voice in my work, but I do think that I incorporate a lot of the voices that I hear and try to mimic them. Yeah. Yeah. Any other questions? All right. Okay. So yeah, I started writing an essay on mindfulness recently, and I thought I would read some excerpts from that for the something else I'm interested in section. I think I'm going over time now, so I'll try to like keep it quick and maybe just summarize. But there's this great. I've been thinking about capitalism a lot lately. I've been noticing a lot of my friends getting more involved in like socialist politics, especially in Vancouver and like the Gene Swanson campaign, and the Vancouver Tenants Union and stuff. And I've just been thinking a lot about how capitalism structures our world. I read this book by Mark Fisher called Capitalist Realism, which talks about the idea, if maybe some of you have read it, if not, it talks about the idea of how capitalism presents itself as the only logical solution to how the world should be structured. So the realism, that's the realism part. And there's a part in the book where he talks about mental health and the privatization of mental illness. And so the essay opens with a quote from that. This piece is called Mindfulness and/as Distraction. This is Mark Fisher. Instead of treating it as incumbent on individuals to resolve their own psychological distress, instead, that is, of accepting the vast privatization of stress that has taken place over the last 30 years, we need to ask, how has it become acceptable that so many people, and especially so many young people, are ill? The, quote, mental health plague, unquote, in capitalist societies would suggest that instead of being the only social system that works, capitalism is inherently dysfunctional, and that the cost of it appearing to work is very high. Okay. As well as I can remember, the first time I encountered the concept of mindfulness was in the winter of 2009/2010, when my intermittent depression reached what felt like an all-time high and possibly a maximum, and I finally sought help from my university's counseling center. The counselor's pamphlets counseled me to make time to sit quietly with my loud thoughts, allowing them to pass me by like only so many terrifying leaves bobbing down a narrow river. And above all, to consciously center my attention on the reality of my breath. Cultivating a healthy detachment from my unbearable thoughts would allegedly help me see them for what they were. Thoughts, not truths, not weighted objects in the world, not signs to be analyzed for clues to my imminent tragic fate, not language to latch onto and identify with. Mere thoughts appearing on one of the stream's horizons, slowly and surely headed for its other, at which point they would presumably drop off the flat earth of my soul and go pick on some other sad sucker. The theory was a severely watered down and westernized forgery of Buddhism, devoid of any of the fun stuff like reincarnation or impending enlightenment. In practice, it seemed to just mean sitting alone in a room, attempting to be okay with sitting alone in a room. When I tried it out, it did help, to some degree. And with time, I gradually learned one of mindfulness's key takeaways. Like so many lessons, it was a paradox. It turned out that neurotically avoiding unthinkable thoughts would only feed them and keep them hovering nearby to pin me in terror beneath them. But allowing them to fully bloom in my mind, to be felt in their fullness rather than reacted to, would soon cause them to pass on, leaving behind a genuine stillness which at that time felt to me like a tiny miracle. In the near decade since then, I've watched as mindfulness has steadily gained in popularity. By about 2012, it became nearly impossible to enter a major bookstore without encountering the latest 5 mindfulness titles stacked neatly on a table of new releases. To sit in a cafe without overhearing someone next to you explaining mindfulness's basic concepts to their sad friend. To visit one's parents without being asked whether you'd heard about the new psychological trend sweeping the nation, etc., etc. Mindfulness escalated to such ubiquity that I, an insufferable contrarian by nature, began to feel allergic to the entire concept, and meditation fell out of my life. Beyond sheer annoyance, I became curious about something else. Why had our culture become saturated with injunctions to sit quietly dissociating in our bedrooms? If the crux of the cure was to simply exist in the physical world, if the best one could do for oneself was to remember how to just be, what did that say about the state of the human person? Then I have this long paragraph where I try to lay out this distraction culture that I kind of like feel that I'm in, where we've all got these like handheld personal computers in our pockets at all times that are vying for attention constantly, and who are like consciously designed to make us look at them as much as possible. And I feel like it kind of makes sense to me that we live in this kind of like perpetual distraction mode, and then we feel very neurotic and distracted and anxious, and then the culture says, well, just don't think about it. Just like sit in a room, watch your thoughts go by, just exist. And that's the way back to the world, which of course hasn't changed, and it's still infinitely distracting and infinitely anxiety producing. So this is kind of the idea I'm working with this in this essay, but from here on it's just kind of like random ideas that aren't fully like structured properly yet, I think. So, but I'll just go through a couple and then I'll get off this stage. Mark Fisher's 2009 masterwork, Capitalist Realism, opens with a chapter entitled "It's Easier to Imagine the End of the World Than the End of Capitalism," in which he lays bare the machinery by which, in the post-Berlin Wall West, capitalism seamlessly occupied the horizons of the thinkable. Seen in this light, it makes sense that enlightenment and nirvana have been conveniently removed from pop culture's mindfulness. These could both be taken as moral horizons, possibilities for growth, and visions of a better future. That is, all those things which capital must eradicate by any means. I'm not claiming distraction is any kind of new phenomenon, but it would be disingenuous to not state that over the past few decades, the infrastructure of distraction has only gotten ever more pervasive, the technology more and more sleek and seductive, the lines between socializing and consuming ever more difficult to discern. And it would be worse not to consider exactly who it is that stands to reap the mega profits of the monetization of our attention. It would be exactly what they'd like us to do. Later, Fisher claims that Over the past 30 years, capitalist realism has successfully installed a, quote, business ontology, unquote, in which it is simply obvious that everything in society, including healthcare and education, should be run as a business. One classic way of setting up a successful business, this sentence doesn't make sense, I'm cutting it. Sorry, it just doesn't, like it really doesn't make sense. The one that I won't cut is, techno-capitalism first installs a paradigm of irresistible/mandatory/highly profitable mindlessness. Then it sells mindfulness as the solution, calling to mind the way globalist monopoly capitalist countries create distant wars that sell weapons to both sides. Then I try to get into a little discussion of self-care that I'm going to skip. Because I haven't figured it out yet. I don't want to say things I don't mean. Here's kind of the conclusion. To be clear, I'm not strictly anti-mindfulness. I just see it as a convenient and self-fulfilling solution prescribed by our neoliberal society. As far as personal psychological issues go, mindfulness is certainly a great band-aid solution. But many problems are of course an alloy of issues within oneself and issues within the world. And mindfulness' only solution is to change the individual and how they relate to a static, unchangeable world. For the individual who wants to see the world change, who believes the world actually must change, and soon, if it's to avoid ceasing to exist entirely, mindfulness cannot fully heal. Pop culture's prescription of mindfulness makes total sense. Turning our attention inward, we remain in the realm of our privatized illness. And to encourage the public to turn their energies only inward in times of crisis is to imply that the real world is crisis-free. If one is looking at it the proper way, the real world is crisis-free if one is looking at it the proper way. All the terrors are actually only within ourselves. Make of that whatever you will. Because mindfulness says that if we can't deal with the cold hard facts of reality, that's probably our problem. If we can't stomach that the cost of living continues to rise uncontrollably while wages never proportionally increase, that the majority of us will never own property or be able to afford to raise children or retire, that is, that our futures lie in the hands of faceless corporate algorithms designed to maximize profit at literally any cost to the public, that we essentially live within one giant inequality accelerator, that in our society of total abundance and prosperity, the poor are nevertheless dying in the streets every day, that no one in government has any intention of giving back any of this stolen land to its rightful indigenous stewards, that all credible sources state that all oil must from now on be left in the ground, but it is not at all being left in the ground, that more of the planet's water supply is being sold to the private sector every day, that the barbarous, imperialist, racist wars we finance have no end in sight, then that's our problem. So go sit in your room and try not to think about it. That's it.